Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is about compulsory voting. The second phase of Lok Sabha elections was conducted yesterday. As many as 95 constituencies saw polling. The voter turnout was about 67.6% across 11 states and 1 union territories. But this is not all. There are some constituencies which had very less polling. Let's take some of the examples. The IT capital, the garden city, the startup capital of India saw some poor numbers. The Bangalore North constituency saw voting percentage as low as 50.03 percentage. The Bangalore Central saw numbers which were pathetic at about 49.76 percentage. Then we have Bangalore South, whose numbers was about 53.33 percentage. Now the question is, how do we make these people come up to the polling booth and cast their votes? How do we overcome this whole issue of people not coming up to the polling booth and casting their vote? The answer to this is compulsory voting. Let's try and understand what this compulsory voting is all about. In India, the right to vote is provided by the Constitution as well as the Representations of the People's Act 1951, subject to both qualifications and disqualifications. Article 326 of the Indian Constitution guarantees the right to every citizen whose age is above 18 years. Further, Section 62 of the Representations of the People's Act 1951 states that every person whose name is in the electoral roll of that particular constituency will be entitled to vote. Thus, when we look into this particular backdrop, both the Constitution as well as the Representation of the People Act make it very clear that every individual who is above the age of 18, whose name is in the electoral roll and does not attract any disqualification whatsoever under this particular act may cast his vote, and this particular procedure is non-discriminatory voluntary system of voting. Now let's look into what this compulsory voting is all about. Compulsory voting basically means it is that particular system where the state government for the panchayati elections or the parliament will pass a law wherein all citizens are required to mandatorily vote in all state elections as well as the central elections. So in case there is an eligible voter who does not attend a particular polling place, he or she may be punished with fines or in the form of community service. So what is this compulsory voting? Compulsory voting basically means the parliament or the state legislature passes a particular law and all those people who are above the age of 18 who are entitled to vote will have to go and cast their vote. In case they do not cast their vote, they will have penalizing provisions enforced on them, or they may have certain subsidies which are withdrawn by the government. Let's see what are the various attempts that have been taken in the past when it comes to India. In the year 1951, during the discussion on the People's Representation Bill in Parliament, the idea of including compulsory voting was mooted by the member. However, this was rejected by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Why? He felt that there will be a lot of practical difficulties in imposing this particular law. As a result, Ambedkar rejected this process. Then we also have Dinesh Goswami Committee, which was appointed in 1990. These committees looked into whether compulsory voting will have to be made compulsory or not. One of the members of this committee had even suggested that only effective remedy for low voter turnout is by introducing the compulsory voting. However, this particular idea was again rejected on the grounds that there were practical difficulties involved in its implementation as said by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Then we have another bill that was introduced in 2004, and that is compulsory voting bill, and this was introduced by a private member, Mr. Bachi Singh. Mr. Bachi Singh proposes this particular bill and he says that every single person who is an eligible voter should be casting his vote, and there can be exception only when there is a person who is suffering from certain illness or anything of urgency or emergency situations. Again, this particular bill was lapsed because people actually sensed that there are a lot of daily wage workers, pregnant women, disabled people whom you cannot enforce things on, and that's the reason that this bill again lapsed. Then we also have another private member bill related to compulsory voting, which was introduced by Mr. JP Agarwal, who was the member of parliament in 2009. So what he said was, apart from having all these stations, we also need to make sure that there are large number of polling booths at convenient places, and special arrangements will have to be taken for senior persons, persons with disability, and pregnant women. The earlier bill was rejected because it did not look into all this. That is why this bill had introduced all these dimensions. However, this particular bill again lapsed because the law minister back then, Veerappa Moily, felt that in a democratic setup, all these process of right to vote should be something of voluntary in nature, and this should not be pushed down the throat or coerced for a person to vote. So as a result, we have seen that there have been n number of examples in the past where people have initiated such a process, but this has ultimately failed. Now let's look into some of the countries where compulsory voting is must. So Australia mandates compulsory voting. The penalty for violation includes an explanation for not voting as well as a fine. So this fine that Australia has ranges from about 20 Australian dollars to about 90 Australian dollars for skipping a particular state poll. It may also be noted, the minute the Australia enforced this particular law in the year 1924, there was a massive turnout. Before 1924, the numbers were comparatively less, but the minute Australia came up with this particular law, there was an increase, and what we see is a voting polling percentage of about 90%. In case people are not voting up, they will have to give reasons as to why they did not vote. Is there a cause for it? Is there any illness behind it? Health issues behind it? If not, then such people will have penalizing provisions by enforcing them to pay certain fine. Then there are other countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, which also have compulsory voting as well. But Brazil and other countries like Peru have a different ways of imposing fine. What do? The government has come up with number of schemes and programs. They have subsidies that they are allocating to the people. In case there are people who are not voting, then such subsidies that are guaranteed to the people will be withdrawn immediately. So on one side you have Australia imposing fines, on other side you have certain countries like Brazil which are withdrawing the subsidy that is guaranteed to the people. Then there are other countries like Chile, Fiji, Netherlands, and Venezuela. All these countries came up with the compulsory voting, but they tried implementing it. It did not work out for them, and ultimately they abandoned this particular process of compulsory voting. Now that we have understood what are the attempts in India, what are the various samples that we see across the world, let's also see what are the advantages in case compulsory voting is brought into picture. When we look at merits, or all those people who are in support of compulsory voting, they basically say that high turnout within a democratic setup is very important for proper democratic mandate. So in case people come up in large numbers, they vote for a particular political party, this is the essence of functioning of democracy is what they feel. They also argue that majority of the people will take politics very seriously. Currently, what is seen in the numbers is that the numbers are very poor. It is abysmal. We have voting percentage of 50-60, which is not in line with respect to what Australia is producing. As a result, what these people sense is, in case it is made compulsory, people will start taking politics very seriously, and a proper democratic mandate will be given, and that is when a political party will have all the right to govern the people. Further, citizens who live in the democratic state also have the duty to vote, which is the essential part of the democracy. Compulsory voting proponents also argue that voting is a civic responsibility. Just like you're paying taxes, just like the government is also ensuring that you are given certain things, you also have an obligation to right to vote. Yes, it need not have to be enforced, coerced, but at the same time you have an obligation, and that particular obligation is for you to take this as a duty and cast your vote so that there is a political party or a candidate who is representing you in the political arena. So it becomes very important as a duty to vote is another set of argument. Compulsory voting is also about legitimacy. The parliament more accurately reflects the will of the people if more number of people are actually casting their vote. We all complain about various issues in the society. We speak about the traffic, we speak about the infrastructure, we speak about many things that are not working in the society. And who is responsible for it? The political parties. So there is also a moral obligation on you that only if you have voted, you have the voice to raise against such political parties and against their action. In case you haven't voted, you do not have that moral obligation to clamor against those people whom you have not voted, because you have not taken the responsibility to actually go up to the polling booth and cast your vote. At the same time, this will also reduce the opportunities for electoral malpractice, as this becomes one of the way to combat vote buying, and this will also reduce the influence of black money in the elections. Because more number of people are voting, the political parties will not be able to fund every single person. So what we will see is a drop in the corruption as well. So all those people who are supporting this particular compulsory voting feel that because of these added advantages, compulsory voting should be made into a law, and it should be implemented both at the national state elections as well as at the panchayati raj elections. So this is with respect to the advantages. At the same time, we will also have to know that this compulsory voting may not be of much impact. Why? Let's look into it. Compulsory voting also violates Article 21. How does it violate Article 21? The Article 21 gives the principles of individual liberty. So individual liberty basically means I would be able to think the way I want it. But when you are enforcing it, what you're taking away from me is the right of liberty, also permits an individual not to vote as well. Then we have a strange thing which is called as donkey voting. This donkey voting is currently seen in Australia. Australia has made it compulsory, so people will have to come and vote. But what is so strange and weird and very bizarre about this is, just because there is a law, people do come up and vote. But because they do not want to come up and vote, they are forced to vote. They do not want to vote for any political candidate or for a political party, but whoever they see in that particular EVM machine or a ballot paper whose name is first, they just dump their voting to that particular person. So a donkey voting basically means when voters are forced to vote, they vote for that particular candidate whose name was on top of the candidates list, thereby losing the whole essence of democracy. Previously, there was 255th Law Commission report which further went on and said that electoral right of voter includes the right to vote or refrain from voting at an election. Has also said that just like any person wants to vote, he also has that legal provision not to vote. So it has espoused this particular thought that he need not have to go up to the polling booth and need not have to cast his particular vote. Even ex-Chief Election Commissioner Nazim Saidi says compulsory voting regime is not feasible in India due to huge population. What he says is that model of compulsory voting is successful in small countries. They can manage it as the number of electorates is very small, but bringing the same system within India is not feasible due to highly populated country like ours. So these are some of the things that we will have to understand when it comes to the compulsory voting, that it will not make much of an impact. So what is the conclusion that we can draw? As long as we do not have this compulsory voting, what we need to do is, before pronouncing this particular verdict and doling out punishment by introducing this particular idea of compulsory voting, the election commission will have to step up its exercises, weed out all the errors and the inconsistencies with the election commission's database, and that is the way forward. Even if I want to vote, I would have voted in previous elections, but yesterday in case I had to vote, my name is not there in the electoral list. So it means that the election commission is not exercising its constitutional mandate properly. So what it has to do is, instead of coming up and doling out these punishments, it has to make sure it removes all these errors, and the foundation for such mandatory voting is thus error-free list of eligible voters and actual voters who want to vote it but their names are not in the electoral roll. So the election commission will have to work on it, and at the same time we can also use the Aadhaar, which can lay the foundation to eliminate all the errors that is there in the system. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Let's look into the next article. This article says government suspends cross-LoC trade after misuse of arms drug smugglers. First, let's try to understand what the cross-LoC is all about. So we have the line of control. So you have the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, then you have the Indian Kashmir as well. There are locals who are occupying this particular region of LoC. So these people want to exchange goods of common use amongst themselves, and that is across POK as well as India. So what these people do is, because they want to exchange goods, they move from one region to another region so that they would be able to exchange the goods as well. So one such provision to exchange of goods was laid in what is called as the cross-LoC trade, and this cross-LoC trade was started in the year 2008. Why? Because there are locals and these locals want to make sure that they can exchange goods. One such prominent place where they would be able to exchange the goods are in these trade facilitation centers. These trade facilitation centers are located at Uris, Salambad in Baramulla and Chakandabag in Poonch. The trade here takes place for 4 days in a week, and kindly remember this is on the basis of barter system. So there is no use of local currency, but instead in case the locals want to do, they can exchange goods with another goods, and it is not through the currency. Another important fact is that there will be no duty that is laid, so it will be zero duty. But what is the context here? The Ministry of Home Affairs has suspended the cross-line of control trade in Jammu and Kashmir, citing funneling of illegal weapons, narcotics and fake currency as the reasons. Let's look into the details of it. There was an investigation, a probe or an inquiry by the National Investigation Agency. So this agency has even suggested that there are significant number of people who are engaged in this particular cross-LoC trade, and these people are being operated by those establishments in Pakistan which are currently barred in India as terrorist organizations. What is it? There are individuals. These individuals are involved in cross-border LoC trade, but these individuals are controlled by those terrorist organizations which are barred in India. So what it means is that all these people who are currently carrying out the trade are pushing across the border drugs, illegal arms and ammunitions, as well as the counterfeit notes. And how do we overcome this issue? That is why the central government, the Ministry of Home Affairs, has come up with this particular circular that there will be suspension of this particular trade across the line of control. So what are the implications? Because the government has come up with this particular move, the decision will basically impact about 300 traders and more than 1,200 people who are engaged in this barter trade. So now these people will have some economic issues, so the government will have to step up and come up with alternative provisions so that these people will not have livelihood issues. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Let's look into the next article. This article is speaking about International Day for Monuments and Sites. This is also known as the World Heritage Day. It is an international observance held on 18th April each year. Around the world, different types of activities including visiting of monuments and heritage sites, conferences, roundtables and newspaper articles are done. The International Day for Monuments and Sites was proposed by International Council on Monuments and Sites, and this was approved by the General Assembly of UNESCO in 1983. So what is the aim of this International Day for Monuments? The aim is basically to generate awareness about the diversity of the cultural heritage of humanity. There are various and myriad cultures in the world, and they have their architectural profess as well. And what we need to do currently is there is growing vulnerability damage due to multiple forces, and the effort needs to be taken to make sure that they are protected and conserved. So the aim of this particular International Day for Monuments and Sites is to protect such damaging as well as vulnerable buildings. In line with this protection and conservation, for the year 2019, the theme is all about rural landscape, which has its importance towards the rural areas. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Moving on, let's look into the next article. This article says CSIR plans genome sequencing to map population density. First, let's understand some important details about CSIR. The Council of Scientific and Industrial Research was established in 1942, and it is an autonomous body and the largest R&D organization. Although this is mainly funded by the Ministry of Science and Technology, it operates as an autonomous body registered under the Registration of Societies Act of 1860. CSI covers a wide spectrum of science and technology, from radio and space physics, oceanography, geophysics, chemicals, drugs, genomics, biotechnology and nanotechnology to mining, aeronautics, instrumentation, environmental engineering and information technology. It provides significant technological intervention in many areas with regard to societal efforts, which include environment, health, drinking water, food, housing, energy, farm and non-farm sectors as well. So this is one such beautiful organization in India which takes the whole ideas of the entire spectrum of science and technology and comes up with innovative ways to solve problems. Currently, this CSIR has also taken up an important operation. So what is it? It is an indigenous genetic mapping effort where nearly 1,000 rural youth from length and breadth of India will have their genomes sequenced. So what do we mean by it? A genome is basically nothing but an organism's and individual's a species complete set of DNA. This includes its genes and its functionality as well. So genomics is basically that branch of biology which focuses on the structure, function, evolution, mapping, editing of all these genomes. So currently CSIR has taken this particular mission to study the genomic structure of all these youths. So as of now, this is all we have to know. In case there are any future updates and how this process works, we will have the discussion once again. Let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about tender oaths. Let's understand what this tender oath concept is all about. You are the citizen of India. The Constitution as well as the Representations of the People's Act guarantees you the right to vote. This is fundamental as this showcases participative democracy. You are all excited to cast your vote to the candidate and political party of your choice. You are a responsible citizen. You enter the polling booth, you showcase your ID to the examiner, and to your surprise, he says that you have already casted your vote. You are surprised, shocked and confused and disappointed. Worried? Don't have to. That's when the idea of tender vote pictures in. So a voter is basically entitled to cast his tender vote when he or she finds out that someone else has casted his or her vote in place of her without that person actually voting. So when we look into the laws, according to Conduct of Elections Rules of 1961, a voter is allowed to cast a tendered vote where someone else representing to be a particular voter has already cast that particular vote. So how does this procedure work? According to Rule 49P of the Conduct of Election Rules, you will be given a tendered ballot paper. This ballot paper will be completely in line with however it is in EVM. So you will not be voting on an EVM machine, but instead you will be given a tendered ballot paper which is an exact replica of what is the EVM. So you will be given a rubber stamp. You will have to take a seal of it and then put a particular rubber stamp seal on this ballot paper for the candidate and the political party which you want to vote for. Post this, you will have to fold this up and give it to the presiding officer who will keep it separately in an envelope cover. So the point to be understood here is that tender votes are cast on the ballot paper. They are then sealed and locked away. In such a case, the voter will not cast their vote on the EVM but instead on the paper, and then the presiding officer will safely put it in a sealing cover and then deliver it to the election commission for future counting of this particular vote. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Moving on, let's look into the next article. This article says traveling abroad a basic right, says the Supreme Court. So what is the context? According to the Supreme Court, it has observed that the right to travel abroad is a genuine and a basic human right like marriage and family. Let's look into the background first. Satish Chandra Verma, Inspector General of Police Principal, Central Training College of the Central Reserve Police at Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, was not given certain permissions. He wanted to travel abroad to his relative's place, but he was not given this particular permission because there was a departmental inquiry which was pending against him. The point to be noted here is he did not have any criminal case whatsoever, but because there was a departmental inquiry, as a result he was not given permission to travel abroad. Then he goes up to the Central Administrative Tribunal. The Administrative Tribunal says, yes, there is an inquiry, you would not be able to go abroad. He goes up to the High Court. The High Court again upholds the tribunal's position that he would not be able to travel abroad without the permission from the Vigilance Committee. As a result, he goes up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court here has quashed both these orders of the CAT as well as the High Court, and it has said the right to travel abroad is an important basic human right, for it nourishes independent and self-determining creative character of that individual, not only of extending his freedoms of action but also by extending the scope of his experience. How did the court come into this particular conclusion? It went back and referred the Menaka Gandhi judgment in the 1970s and also of the US Supreme Court case of 1958 in Kent versus the Duels. So what did this judgment basically say? This particular judgment said that the right to travel abroad is a fundamental right enshrined under Article 21, but this is not absolute, but it has certain limitations. So this right to go abroad is an aspect of personal liberty which is enshrined in the Constitution. This cannot be limited or curtailed. However, a suitable restrictions can be imposed, but such a restriction should not be arbitrary, unfair, oppressive or unreasonable. Instead, such a procedure should be just, fair and reasonable. So according to this particular judgment that was laid in the Menaka Gandhi case back in 1970, the Supreme Court has looked into it and it has said these limitations that are given in this particular backdrop is not reasonable. That is the prime reason we are quashing away this, and he is entitled to leave the country and travel abroad is what this order has been given. So moving on, let's look into the next article. This article is speaking about stubble burning. So one request from you guys is, we have already discussed about this on October 1, 2018 and also on 27th March 2019, where a detailed analysis of stubble burning has already been done. So kindly look into it for the same. However, this article here has come up with certain steps that the government will have to take radically to overcome the issue of pollution in the National Capital Region as well as elsewhere. So what are these important alternatives? It has requested the government to come up with a law such that in case there are people violating this law with respect to stubble burning, a penalizing provision will have to be enforced, strict sanctions will have to be imposed. so that people do not actually violate the law that has been established with respect to stubble burning. It also wants a blanket ban on the firecrackers in the region of Delhi. This article further says that a benchmark has to be laid for the vehicles. In case there are emissions more than this particular benchmark, then such vehicles will have to be stripped off from the roads. Then we also need to condition the fuels. We need to have a fuel standards as well. Currently we have certain engines which are Bharat 4 and we have also moved to Bharat 6. Such standards will have to be implemented immediately. It further goes up and says that certain amount of money should be allocated in the budget. So this explicit fund or a separate fund in the budget should be specifically dealing with pollution and other consequences of pollution. Finally, what the government will also have to do is it will also have to provide agricultural subsidies to the farmers to disincentivize all this crop burning, improve the drainage system, and also incentivize the use of renewable energy so that we would be able to curb the menace of stubble burning. So what is the conclusion that it draws us? When it comes to the pollution, only the Supreme Court and the higher courts are ready to fight it out. The government as well as the civil society are not having an active participation. So it requests the government, the civil society, the private organization and everyone to gel up together and make sure they're coming up with alternatives so this becomes a fruitful exercise. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Moving on, let's look into the next article. This article is speaking about the bubble boy disease. So this is a disorder which is officially called as X-linked severe combined immune deficiency. It is a genetic disorder that causes babies to be born with little to no immune protection, making them prone to developing life-threatening infections. Because they are not immune to these diseases, most of these kids die at a very early age of 1 to 2 years. The SCIDX1 is caused by a mutation in a gene called as IL2RG, which is critical for normal immune function. Because this particular gene is not functioning properly, because there are a lot of changes within this particular gene, this is resulting in this particular disorder. The condition is rare, likely affecting about 1 in 2 lakh newborns. The disease can be essentially cured by a bone marrow transplant from a sibling that is a match in terms of certain immune system proteins. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Let's move on to the next article. This article here is speaking about the problems with respect to the jet airways, the employment issues that may come up and what the government will be doing in order to overcome this issue, which we will be taking up very shortly because there are updates that needs to come up. So we will be holding on to this article. In the future, we will be taking up once again. Moving on, let's look into some of the practice questions. Consider the following about Lassa fever. It is an acute viral illness. The disease is endemic in the rodent population in parts of West Africa. Which of the following statements are correct? Both these statements are correct. So what are the symptoms? Starting with fever, general weakness and malaise. After few days, headache, sore throat, muscle pain, chest pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cough and abdominal pain may follow as well. So how do we prevent it? There is no vaccination as such, but prevention requires isolating those who are infected and decreasing the contact with the rats. Moving on, let's look into the next practice question. The Guardian program is related to providing support to startups to come up with innovative mechanism to upgrade artificial intelligence in India. It helps women to overcome violence, connects school students and scientists to extend students' classroom learning with that of a very well-planned research. It is a genomic study to understand rare diseases. The answer for this is genomic study to understand rare diseases. Let's look into the explanation. The Guardian program aims to characterize rare genetic disease and is a systematic approach integrating high throughput sequencing, computational analysis and disease modeling. So this is a program of CSIR IGIB and has initiated this program for precision medicine in clinics in India. Moving on, let's look into the next practice question. Arrange the following from north to south. Zagros Mountain, Elbrus Mountains, Sabalan Mountains as well as Zardako Mountains. The answer for this is 3241. Let's look into the map for the same. So you have the Sabalan Mountains followed by Elbrus Mountains, Zardako Mountains, and then Zagroso Mountains. Moving on, let's look into the previous year question paper. Which among the following provided a common factor for tribal insurrection in India in the 19th century? The answer for this is the complete disruption of old agrarian order of the tribal communities. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.